My father is not the kind of man who hugs you first. He shakes your hand. He holds eye contact a beat longer than comfortable. He built his trucking company from 2 rigs and a borrowed office in Tulsa, and he ran it the same way he raised me, with precision, with patience, and without a lot of unnecessary sentiment. So when he showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon in November, unannounced, I knew something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. I was still in my work uniform. I'd picked up a double shift at the hospital cafeteria that week because the electric bill was overdue, and my husband had told me, again, that we were going through a tight patch. My hands smelled like industrial cleaner. My hair was in a bun that had stopped being intentional around hour 6. My father looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked past me into the apartment. The second-hand couch, the cracked tile near the kitchen sink I'd been asking about for 4 months, the stack of unopened mail I'd been too tired to sort. He said, "Wasn't $40,000 a month enough?" And I said, "What 40,000? I need to go back, because the way it ended only makes sense if you understand how it started." My father met my husband at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Oklahoma City. My husband, I'll call him what he was, which was charming, was working in commercial real estate at the time. He had a firm handshake and a good suit and the specific kind of confidence that reads as competence until it doesn't. My father liked him. That mattered to me more than I want to admit now. We dated for 14 months. He was attentive in the beginning, the way certain people are attentive when they are still deciding what you're worth to them. He remembered small things. He showed up when he said he would. He told me I was the most grounded person he'd ever met. And I believed him because no one had ever described me that way before, and it felt like being seen. My father gave us his blessing. My grandmother flew in from Shreveport. We got married on a Saturday in April at a venue outside the city, and in the photographs from that day, I look genuinely happy, which is the detail that still gets me when I think about it too hard. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that 3 weeks before our wedding, my father had set up a private fund in my name. He hadn't told me about it. That was deliberate. He said later that he didn't want me spending the money carelessly, didn't want it to change the dynamic between me and my husband, didn't want me to feel like I was being managed. He'd had his lawyers structure it so that $40,000 a month was transferred into an account under my legal name. The account required 2 signatures for withdrawals, his and mine. Except he'd made one assumption that unraveled everything. He assumed I knew the account existed. I didn't. My husband did. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of the city that was fine but not impressive, which I thought was my husband being responsible. He said we were saving for a house. He said the market was rough. He said a lot of things in that particular register of reasonable-sounding explanation that I now understand is a practiced skill, not an accident. His mother moved to the city 8 months after we got married. She was not a cruel woman, exactly. She was a woman who had decided, some years before I came along, that her son's life was an extension of her own preferences, and she participated in it accordingly. She had opinions about how I loaded the dishwasher. She had opinions about the neighborhood, about my job, about what kind of curtains belonged in a living room. She delivered these opinions in a tone of affectionate helpfulness that made it very difficult to object without sounding unhinged. My husband sided with her. Not dramatically, not in the way that would have made it obvious. He sided with her in the quiet, structural way, the way that left me second-guessing my own reactions, apologizing for things I didn't think I'd done wrong, shrinking into a version of myself that fit better into whatever they decided our life should look like. I kept my job at the hospital cafeteria. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it, and I liked the people I worked with, and it got me out of the apartment. My husband said it was sweet that I wanted to stay busy. His mother said she admired my work ethic. They said these things while, as I would learn later, spending $40,000 a month in my name on things I would never see. I didn't know about the account. They had found it first. Here is how that happened as best as I can piece it together. Before the wedding, my husband was added to the email associated with my personal financial documents, something I'd agreed to in a moment of newlywed openness, the kind of administrative trust you extend before you understand what trust actually requires. A notification had come through. He'd seen the account details. He'd told his mother. They spent 2 years figuring out how to access it without my signature. And then, when they found a way, I still don't fully understand the legal mechanics and my father's lawyers are still working through it, they did. A private membership club downtown. 2 cars I never drove. A vacation property in Colorado that I never visited. Designer goods that arrived at a UPS store registered to a name I didn't recognize. Dinners, flights, hotel suites, a series of investments in his mother's name that looked, on paper, like business expenses. I was working double shifts because he told me our savings were low. I was rationing groceries because he said we needed to be careful. I was wearing the same 3 pairs of work shoes on rotation because I felt guilty spending money on myself when things were supposedly tight. And in December of that second year, I got pregnant. Pregnancy didn't make things easier, which I know is obvious but felt like a specific cruelty at the time. I was exhausted in a way that went past tired, past the kind of fatigue that sleep fixes. I was still working. My husband had taken on what he described as a demanding project that kept him out late most evenings. His mother was around constantly, supervising my prenatal appointments, offering opinions on baby names, making herself indispensable in a way that left me feeling crowded in my own home. I asked him once, directly, why I never saw any money move through our joint account. He said the fund was in a holding structure until some tax issue resolved. He said my father's lawyers had put restrictions on it. He said these things with the confidence of a man who had spent considerable time making sure I couldn't verify them. I believed him. I went back to work. I mopped floors. I restocked condiment stations. I stood on my feet for 9 hours at a time while my body was doing something enormous, and I told myself this was temporary, that things would ease up, that the life my father had intended for me was somewhere just around the next corner. My daughter was born in August. We named her Lily. I came home from the hospital with a newborn in one arm and a diaper bag I'd bought secondhand in the other, and I sat down on the couch that still had the secondhand cushions, and I thought, something is wrong. Not newly wrong. Wrong in a way that had been wrong for a long time and that I had been too tired to name. 2 weeks after I came home, my father came to visit. He is not a man who telegraphs his emotions. He sat down at my kitchen table, accepted the coffee I offered, and watched me for a moment in the way he does when he's deciding how to say something. Then he said he'd had his accountant run a full audit of the fund. He said $40,000 a month had been going out for 26 months. He said his lawyers had flagged an irregularity in the access logs and traced it back through 3 intermediary accounts to a management company registered in his name, my husband's name. My husband's name. He laid a folder on the table between us. I didn't pick it up right away. He said, wasn't $40,000 a month enough? I said, Dad, I never knew there was a fund. The look on his face is not something I'm going to try to describe. Some expressions don't translate into words without losing something essential. He said, I know you didn't. And then he picked up his phone and called his lawyers. What followed was not fast. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a version of this story where justice arrives swiftly and completely, and that version is more satisfying but less true. The legal process took 11 months. My husband retained his own attorney, his mother retained a separate one. There were depositions and document requests and a period of 3 weeks where I genuinely didn't know what the outcome would be. I moved back into my father's house in October with Lily. It was not the independent life I had imagined for myself, but I was too depleted to be proud about it, and my father's house has a backyard and a guest room that gets good light in the morning, and Lily slept better there than she ever had in the apartment. My father hired a forensic accountant, not his firm's regular guy, a specialist who'd spent 20 years tracing fraudulent transfers through exactly the kind of layered shell structure my husband had used. She found everything: the club memberships, the cars, the Colorado property, the investments in his mother's name, a small but significant amount that had been moved offshore before the audit caught up to it. The final number was just over $1 million. Not the full amount, some of it was spent in ways that couldn't be recovered, but most of it. My husband did not go to prison, which is the answer I know people want. What I can tell you is that the civil judgment against him is real and it will follow him. He is paying it back in installments that will define the shape of his financial life for the foreseeable future. His mother's assets were included in the settlement. The investments in her name were liquidated. He called me once in the middle of the legal process. He said he'd done what he had to do. He said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. He said he'd always intended to pay it back. I didn't respond. I hung up, and I went into the backyard where my daughter was asleep in her stroller in the October sun, and I stood there for a while with my hand on the stroller handle, and I thought about all the times I had explained away the thing that was right in front of me. There are questions I get asked when I tell this story to people who know me. Why didn't I check the accounts myself? I didn't know the account existed. But I also, in our joint accounts, had largely abdicated that responsibility, and I won't pretend otherwise. That was a mistake I made from a place of trust, and trust is not stupidity, but it is a kind of vulnerability if extended without verification. Why didn't I talk to my father sooner? Because I was embarrassed. Because I thought the financial stress was temporary. Because I had absorbed somehow the idea that struggling quietly was more dignified than asking for help. My father would have told me if I'd asked that there was no dignity in suffering you don't have to sustain. Why didn't I leave when the signs were there? I've thought about this more than anything else. The honest answer is that the signs were presented to me in a frame that made them look like something other than what they were. The control was gradual, the explanations were plausible. The version of the story I was being told was internally consistent, and I had no access to the information that would have let me see the version underneath. He didn't love me. He assessed me, and then he built a life around the assessment. I am not writing this from a place of bitterness, which I realize sounds like exactly what a bitter person would say. So let me be specific. I am writing this from my father's kitchen table, with Lily in the next room making the particular sound she makes when she is almost, but not quite, asleep. And the window above the sink showing the back of the yard where the oak tree my father planted the year I was born has started to turn. The fund is still active. My father restructured it. Different account, different access controls, dual authenticated through a financial advisor I meet with quarterly. It goes toward Lily's future and toward rebuilding what I lost, not in money because the money was never the whole of it, but in something harder to name. The belief that I am someone who knows what is happening in her own life. My husband remarried 18 months after our divorce was finalized. I found out through someone we both knew and I felt nothing useful, which I think counts as a form of healing. My father still doesn't hug first. He still holds eye contact a beat longer than comfortable. But a few weeks after the settlement closed, he came into the kitchen while I was making coffee and he stood next to me at the counter, and he said very quietly that he should have told me about the fund from the beginning. I said I wished he had. He nodded. He poured his own coffee. He said, "We'll do it different from here." That is, for him, a long speech. For me, it was enough. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a person was being lied to by someone they loved. I don't think that anymore. The worst thing is spending years building your life around an explanation that was never true, and doing it so sincerely that you don't even notice the structure underneath starting to give. My husband did not lose control one day and betray me. He made a series of deliberate choices. Small ones first, then larger ones, and each choice was possible because the one before it had already worked. That's the part I had to sit with for a long time. Not the anger, which came easily enough, but the architecture of it. The patience it took. The fact that what looked like love at the beginning was actually assessment. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from working hard inside a false story. I mopped floors while carrying Lily. I rationed groceries. I apologized for moods that were, in retrospect, the entirely rational response of a person who sensed something was wrong but had been given no framework to name it. I was doing all of that, and across the city, money that was meant for my life was buying club memberships and flights and a vacation property I never saw. What I know now is that the situation contained its own correction. Not because the universe is fair. I'm not interested in that kind of comfort, but because sustained dishonesty requires sustained effort, and that effort leaves evidence. The forensic accountant my father hired didn't find the money through luck. She found it because my husband had to move it, and moving it left a trail, and the trail led back to him. The lie was structurally unsustainable. It always was. I just didn't have access to the information that would have let me see that sooner. The intelligence I wish I'd had wasn't the kind that comes from being smarter or more suspicious. It was simpler than that. Know what accounts exist in your name. Read what you sign. Ask questions that feel awkward to ask. The discomfort of those conversations is nothing compared to what it costs. Skip them. I think about what I want Lily to understand when she's old enough to understand it. I want her to know that trust is not the same as blindness, and that loving someone does not require you to stop knowing what is true. I want her to know that asking for information about your own life is not a failure of faith. It is the basic minimum of self-respect. I want her to know that, when something feels wrong, the feeling is data. My father and I don't talk about it much now. We don't need to. He restructured the fund. I meet with a financial advisor quarterly. Lily is learning to walk, and the oak tree in the backyard is turning, and on mornings when the light comes in right through the kitchen window, I feel something that is not quite peace but is moving steadily in that direction. I held on to what I could control, and I let the rest work itself out through the systems I should have trusted earlier: legal, financial, familial. That is not a glamorous lesson, but it is the true one.